This is Future Sense Now, where we explore the landscape and byways of our shared futures. Future Sense Now is brought to you by the Futures Forum. Stay tuned for a journey to the futures of women with host Dr. Claire Nelson.
Greetings and welcome to Future Sense Now, an online e-magazine of the Futures Forum. It is March 2019 and we're celebrating Women's History Month with an exploration into the future history of women 2030 and beyond. And why 2030? Well, the UN Sustainable Development Goal 5 speaks specifically to the development and inclusion of women. And in a recent trend report on what women futurists are watching, women futurists were watching the increasing trend of women seeking elected leadership and starting their organizations and businesses, and it is indeed happening all around the world. So what else might we expect of the future history of women? In this segment, I will speak with MEI MEI Song, Dr. MEI MEI Song, who is an associate professor at the Tamkang University Graduate Institute of Futures. She's also director of their Center for Futures Intelligence and Research. And so now I'm saying greetings and welcome to MEI MEI Song, Dr. MEI MEI Song, where I caught up with her in Armenia. How are you?
Good, thank you.
So I caught you all the way in Armenia, traveling from Taiwan. I'm glad you took the time to talk to me. I'm so excited about that.
Me too.
I want to begin by asking you about UN Agenda 2030 Goal 5, which talks about protecting human rights and promoting gender equality and empowerment of women and girls. Now, and you, as a futurist that has been involved in teaching futures and thinking about the future, I mean, Tamkang stands out as a leading institution in this space. How do you view this statement, and how do you see future studies playing a part in the SDG?
I think futures fit in perfectly with SDG, especially when it emphasizes we can create the future that we want. And in the past, we are used to listening from top, listening from usually men in the leadership level, and we usually don't feel that we usually feel that we can only follow the future that someone else set for us. And but now it's different. We are empowering people by giving them the tool to see the future better, in a sense. In the past, people usually,
Well, go ahead.
In the past, people usually want to think about the future, but then they feel that, well, because they don't have the right tools in a way. So they feel that there's nothing they can do. They think about it for like 5 seconds and then it's done because there's nothing better that they can do. But these days with futures thinking, we can empower people. I'm here in Armenia. I was in Mongolia last week.
Wow.
I've seen, yes. And I was in Timor-Leste last month. And I've seen so many people feeling empowered when I talk to them about the future. Even with the 20-minute session, they were like, wow, I didn't know about this. And they're mainly women.
So I want to ask you about, because Tamkang University is, how old is this? I mean, how old is the program at Tamkang University?
It's about 15 years old.
Wow. So it's one of the longest running programs in the world, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And so as you go around the world, so you said you're in Armenia now, you were in Mongolia last week, you were in Timor-Leste last month. How are you bringing the very academic study of the future into a more practical use on the ground?
You know 6 pillars, right?
Yes.
That
So
we use?
I don't, but the audience doesn't know that. So what 6 pillars?
6 pillars is a framework developed by Dr. Sohail Inayatullah, and he put together futures tool. We have lots of futures tools and methods in future studies, and about 30 to 40 right now, and actually it's increasing every year. And he put together some of them and put them into 6 pillars framework, which is mapping the future, anticipating the future, timing the future, deepening the future, creating alternative future, and then finally transforming the future. With this framework, we put it in workshops, like 2-day, 3-day, 4-day workshop, so that people can start to feel. I mean, you can see that there are different levels of depth in a sense. So we can start taking people.
So I'm going to ask you to give me a 6-minute version of the 3-day workshop. So let's talk about first mapping the future. What exactly do you do when you talk about mapping the future?
Can we talk about pillar 0 to me?
Yes.
Before we even go into the first pillar.
Sure.
I usually, Sohail uses questioning the future. Yes. He starts to question people's myth about people's way of seeing the future in a sense. I personally like to do sensing the future. I take people to sense how they see the future. It's a little bit different from questioning the future, but in a sense, it's the same thing. We try to unpack how people see the future. And the reason that we can't think about the future in the long run is because we have lots of myths about the future. So usually in the beginning of the workshop, I would spend, if it's a 3-day workshop, I would spend the entire first day unpacking those ideas. So
let me stop you right there. So now tell me, when you talk about sensing the future in a culture, let's say of Timor-Leste, which is I guess very developing in really early stages of their development, how do the women in that space different from, say, the women in Mongolia where you were last week, or are you seeing the same things in women as they sense the future? So let's start with that, because I think this is going to be a very exciting conversation.
That's a good question. How are the women different?
In sensing the future, is it culturally bound? Are they seeing different things?
Yes, totally. The reason I like sensing the future or questioning the future is that futures, the 6 pillars futures thinking overall is that we start from people's present and past. Yes. It's not a tool and methods that we come in and tell you, this is the expert's view and you should take it. It's very rooted from everyone's own experiences and everyone's own past. And as you know, Timor-Leste had a very harsh past until like 15 or 16 years ago. So it has to come from there. If you're more than 16 years old, then it has to, the view of your future has to come from that. We have to take care of that part. And even if you're under 16 years old, you still hear that in the society. You hear that in your parents' conversation, in everybody's view about the present. So yes, it's very culturally different. And to me, I like to start it with their experiences, with how they see, with their past and the present.
Are women in these countries seeing the future of themselves as women as growing in their empowerment, or are they fearful? What are you sensing from these experiences around the world, these last 2 experiences?
I really have to say, in Timor-Leste, we mainly got in contact with the people in the government. And it was the same in Mongolia. In Mongolia, we also got in contact with people in the press. So it was a little more diverse. So whatever I'm saying now is from that group of people. So even within the same culture, there are still different because of your occupation, your age, and it's still different. Your class, right? It's still different. Yeah. So what I'm sensing right now from them, can we talk about Mongolia first?
Yes, sure.
In Mongolia, last week, it was my 2nd trip to Mongolia.
Yes.
And during the 1st and 2nd trips, I could see that the women there are so empowered to see farther down into the future. The first time I was there, I was totally amazed with them. And then I got, I could understand that because they are protectors in a sense from the very beginning because of the harsh weather. that they have to embrace everyone, they have to take care of everyone, and they have to see farther down into the horizons. See horizon is no problem to them because they have to see the horizons because the weather changes so fast. And if you're not careful, it could kill you.
Got you.
So they have developed that kind of
Far sight or
yes,
long view.
yes, the long view, and then they embrace new ideas right away.
Got you.
Right away. And what I also saw is that in Ulaanbaatar, which is the one of the fastest growing capitals in the world,
Yes.
they are quickly urbanizing. And to me, it seems that, it's only my sensing, there's no research based for that. I sense that men had more issue with that because they are used to riding on a horse, being the conqueror in that wild field, and all of a sudden they have to come into the city and work as drivers or workers, and it's a big adjustment to them. And women in lots of families had to take that responsibility to hold the place in that sense.
Wow.
And that's how I sensed during the 2 trips. So women in that sense, they were very, well, I have to say, everywhere I go, I seem to feel higher level of embracement of futures from women than men.
Interesting.
It's very interesting. And my interpretation so far is that women are trained to be adaptive in all sorts of cultures. So when there's futures is very new to a lot of people, as you know.
Yes.
And for some, if you are not used to being challenged, then you might feel like, okay, this is not what I want. And you might reject it right away. But women, on the other hand, in most societies are used to so-called being subordinate.
Yeah.
So, and they are more open to having an alternative thinking method in that sense.
Wow.
So that's how I sensed it. And back to Timor-Leste.
Yes.
Because they went through war, and during the war, it was a very painful past to them. And of course, a lot of men were killed during the war, during the fight, and but a lot of women were starved to death too. It was one of, yes,
Wow.
women and children. Wow. And they actually had a huge amount of people who were the victim of the war. Yes. And so women, again, had to play that role of envision a different future, in a sense.
And holding that space, as you say.
Yes.
And so this idea of starting out with sensing, and the way you're working with these governments who are, in a sense, responsible for helping to drive the change towards the 2030 goals around women, these workshops are beginning to help them as individuals as well as government agents to think more productively, if you will, about the future.
Yes. When I do workshops, I always try to tie it back to the personal level, because even if you're at the highest government level, but if this doesn't make sense to you personally, it's not going to get carried out throughout your job. So I always do different levels, like on your job, on your view about the country, and on yourself. That's the most important part.
Yes. So now, from sensing the future, you move to mapping the future.
Yes.
What happens in mapping the future?
For mapping the future, we usually start with shared history. There's a timeline, and we go back to the history. But usually, okay, let me rewind to sensing the future. I usually use it to, I didn't really get to go to that part. I usually use a tool that I created called Time Machine, which was taking people back to the past and let them feel the difference in 30 years. And then they can start to feel that, okay, I am empowered to think about a very different future, because 30 years in any society has lots and lots of change. Yeah. And without that, if you can't realize that, then whatever future you're going to map in during mapping the future, it's just going to be I call it fluffy. It's actually a so-called extended present, or even not extended. I often joke that people just replace the number and use the present sense and say that's the future. But that shouldn't be the case. So before we map the future, I like to take people to sense how much change there is in 30, 40 years.
Now, do you find, like in the case of these countries where there's been violent conflict, do you find that the women have difficulty in sort of not wanting to go back there, or in terms of just even mapping it, or are they comfortable in having these kinds of conversations if they see it as relevant to constructing their future?
That's a great point. I always see that it's more comfortable to women than men to talk about the painful past. I think it has to do with gender. It has to do with how we were raised. It has to do with men being used to putting up the facade of like, I'm strong, I can deal with this. And women, on the other hand, usually don't have that burden. So in order to envision a different future, I really believe that we have to be able to acknowledge the painful past, or whatever past it was.
And I like that you kind of frame it around the burden that men have to carry. Because if we're talking about constructing future societies, given what's ahead of us in terms of whether it's the potential water crisis or the climate change crisis, in a sense, I think what you're learning from the women who have gone through these crises might be very instructive for teaching us in the West of how to deal with this crisis, don't you think?
Yes, totally. And in most countries, we are used to taking men's view. We can say that the reason, well, I can't blame this all on men. I really can't do that. But in the past, we are having all these issues because we were using the mindset of men in terms of running the world, or running the country, or running the city, or running the family, right? And many years ago, like I can't remember how many, some years ago, I actually ran a workshop in the Philippines, in Victoria City. And we actually restricted participation of men because we wanted to see what kind of city that we can develop if it's designed by women.
And how did that turn out?
Yes, it was very fun. It was very different because then the view is not about high-rise building anymore. The view is not about urban sprawl anymore. The view is not just about technology anymore. And then it starts to change a lot. And I actually, last year, I ran it in Taipei with high school students. And it was for female students. And we were trying to, the organizer was trying to encourage women, young women, to get into STEM, science and technology. So that they called us science camp. But again, I used the same methods. I restricted participation of boys in that workshop. It was so interesting. In every group, there are 6 girls and only 1 boy. And in that workshop, I could see so many boys feeling disoriented because they are used to being the dominant in that entire science and technology sector. So for the first time, they could experience how it feels to be a minority.
Yes.
I could see so many boys sitting there like, gosh, this is how it feels? Or, gosh, these young women are incredible. That kind of reaction, incredible being, sometimes it was negative, sometimes it was positive, but it was a whole new experience to them. And again, it was a whole new experience to all those girls because they were dominant in that sense. I'm not saying the bad dominant, but they could create a future that's totally different in terms of science and technology. That's totally different from what they are used to, because it was created mostly by men before.
Wow. So you do this time machine to the past, and then you do what with the future?
And then I started unpacking those myths based on their experience, because I do experiential futures a lot. So I do want them to reflect on their experiences in time machine.
Yes.
And then of course we take them to mapping the future, which like I said, starts with going back to the past, and then we use future triangle, and then we start to ask them to map out the vision that they want.
Okay, so good. So vision number one. So tell me about now the visions that they want, that you're hearing from these different experiences you have had in the last couple of months.
Wow. It's kind of difficult all of a sudden to answer that question. There are so many.
Just one, two or three. Just two or three. What stands out for you
in terms of vision?
Yes, that you're hearing from these women. You know, you work with women in Mongolia, women in Timor-Leste. What are you hearing about their visions? Is it? I mean, are they fearful? Are they optimistic? Are they neutral? Are they cautious? I mean, what are women in these places thinking about, you know, 2030, 2040, their children, their grandchildren? What are you feeling from them?
If we want to talk about future triangle, I mean, at the level of mapping the future alone, then the reason I hesitated answering your question was because it was only the first pillar. And whatever vision that they come up with at this stage, it's usually still, again, the fluffy one. That's usually the case. But then we take them to see how we take them to the second pillar, which is anticipating the future. Yes. It's like, okay, you have this vision, but what is going to disturb that vision? And then we take them to scan the environment of the future, not just the present. Yes. And then they can take in, we use emerging issues analysis, and then they can take in, oh, this might come in, and then they put that in the original vision, or they might overturn the original vision, say that's not what we want anymore. And then we want to create a new one, which is what we are trying to get them to do. And then we take them to Futures Wheel, which expands their imagination about the future horizontally. Yes. So they can see more and more and more connection, and then they can take more elements from those, from the expansion into the vision, the new vision. Yeah. And of course, timing the future, you know about that. We see mega history so that they can know the place, and then deepening the future, which is going down deeper. We use CLA, you know about that, causal layered analysis. Yes. So we take them to go deep, all the way down to the worldview, the values, and metaphor. Yes. And then we try to overturn that. And can you create a new transformed future based on that? And then that's the new one.
So that is exactly what I'm trying to get to, because your perspective as somebody who is working with people around, how many countries have you been to in the last 4 years, for example?
That's a good question. I need to count.
I say Philippines, Mongolia, Armenia, Timor-Leste, I mean, your own country. I mean, yes. So at least 6, right?
Yes, in Malaysia.
Malaysia, right.
Right.
So it's a side of the world that people on my side of the world, where I am, we don't hardly even know what's going on. So that's why I'm so fascinated. And we understand that, for example, Malaysia, for example, is a majority Muslim country. And there's one view of the world on this side of what that might feel like. So I'm really curious as to what were you hearing about the future vision that women have of themselves in these kinds of very different cultures? Whatever you remember would be news for me, because I've never heard it, so it would be news to me.
That is a very tough question for me to answer right now, because on the top of my head, I'm trying to grasp the hundreds of visions that I'm hearing.
I mean, overall, were they optimistic? I mean, did you hear, for example, on the island spaces like Timor-Leste, are they concerned about climate change? Are they concerned about how they will manage to grow food in this, in this growing hurricane, upheaval, drought, whatever cycles. What are some of the things that really pop up that you see coming up time and time again for women from these developing countries?
I think to answer the easier question, yes, people are always hopeful, not just women, men too. And when they think about the future and towards the end of the workshop, they always, I mean, some people are pessimistic, but you can't stay that long. And especially, that's the part I like about futures, because it gives people, when we talk about past, present, and future, the three dimensions, future is the only space that we can change anything. Yeah. You cannot change the past. You can see how you see the past, but you cannot change it. You can't even change the present because you're already here. But in the future, there's always something that you can change. And that's what futures is empowering. The part that the futures is empowering people, right? Yeah. So yes, people are always optimistic in that sense. But I think the greatest difference after they go through the futures process, if you call it, is that after the process, they have new ideas about what they can do.
Okay.
It's not it's not an over, and they know how to shift their focus. Usually when we start talking about future in the fluffy stage, usually I see it as a reflection of what we don't have right now. Yes. That's the immediate response. If we don't have food, we are hoping that we have food in the future. If we don't have water, we hope that we have clean water in the future. That kind of immediate response. But after the futures process, people start to see different alternatives, different importance in different things. Mm-hmm. But back to your question, I'm just trying to draw. It feels like a research question to me, right?
Well, why do you think about that question? I'm going to ask another question because you might come. Yeah. So, on our side of the world, in the West, we're talking a lot about hashtag Me Too in terms of violence and harassment. We're talking a lot about hashtag equal pay, hashtag the future is female. How is that playing out? Or what are the variations of that you're hearing in your own country, in Taiwan, or other parts of the Asian culture?
Taiwan, in a sense, is a lot more Western than these countries that I'm mentioning. Yeah. A lot Western, meaning that all the hashtag that you were talking about is on play in Taiwan too, and it's the same. People are, but in the countries that I just mentioned, yes, it's not as, it doesn't stand out as much, or at least among the workshops, because usually we like I said, we talk about government, talk about governance and politics. It doesn't stand out that much. Uh-huh. But I can say for sure that it doesn't matter to them.
Yes, got you.
Yes.
Got you. And so, do you find that in certainly in Taiwan, let's go back to Taiwan because you live there, are you find that the futurist female movement, for example, or culture is coalescing with other groups around environment or water? How is the conversation in your country about women's empowerment evolving around the future of the country of Taiwan?
I can't say there's much going on over there in terms of connecting futures and all the issues that you talk about. Yes. We do have.
Yeah. Pardon? The reason why I asked that is because gender is not lived in isolation. I mean, you're living and you have to deal with lack of food or water or a job. So Taiwan, as you say, is very sophisticated. Is there a conversation around equal pay or equal access to jobs in this very automated future? What are some of the issues that are beginning to emerge as challenge points in the Taiwanese space?
I have to say, in Taiwan, in terms of gender equality, I'm not saying in Taiwan men and women are equal. That's very far from the truth. I don't think that's the case in any part of the world. On the other hand, because I teach students all the time and I run workshops for people all the time, but when I mention like gender equality, people usually feel that we are pretty equal already. So in Taiwan, people actually want to move on to LBGT issue.
Yeah.
And so especially for my students, the young people, the people in their early 20s, when I mentioned that the future of gender equality, and they're like, okay, they automatically think that that's the LGBT, that's about gay marriage. It's not about women or men anymore.
Ah, so we've gone past that. They think we've gone past that.
Yes, but actually that's pretty frustrating to me because I can see in so many places and so many occasions that that's not the case anymore. But thinking that you're beyond that, meaning that you might forget to deal with the issues that's still at present.
Yeah. So in terms of government in Taiwan, are you finding that women's leadership is rising in that space? What about the private sector, corporate boards? How is that emerging in Taiwan?
We have a female president. And yes, we do. And she is she is a female president that has no family attachment, meaning that she doesn't have a father that was the president or a brother or anything like that. She was like self-made in a sense.
Wow.
That kind of president, yes. So, which is very unique in Asia, honestly. And that's the other thing. People usually feel that, oh, we already have a female president. That means women are in power now.
It's like the black issue in America. We already had a black president.
Yes, you're right. You're right. Very, very.
We're all
exactly.
equal. What are we talking about? We're all equal now. You know, it's very interesting, this approach you have to change making. And one of the reasons why I have been doing these conversations on the future of women for the last, this is like year number 6, is because I'm really concerned about moving beyond, as you say, the textbook numbers game and begin to kind of personalize what really are we talking about. If we're talking about this global space, and we're talking about global citizenship, and we're talking about a planetary society such as we are, where, you know, this pen was probably made in China, the plastic probably came from somewhere else, you know. So, you know, really we're living in a global ecosystem. I think it's very important that we take some of these global challenges, which do have to be lived and thought about individually, but we have to find a way to connect the stories of the individuals. And that's what really I'm hoping that these conversations over time, as people hopefully share them or listen to them on eventually I probably will, you know, print them into a text so people who like to read can read them. We begin to sort of provide a different lens through which to view sometimes what's a very abstract idea of this more holistic, thriving future. And in the case of Tamkang University, as one of the leading universities in doing future studies, how do you feel Tamkang University itself and your Center for Futures Intelligence can help to inform this conversation around future of women and the future in general, actually?
We actually, first of all, we do it by teaching. Apparently, it's a university. So Tamkang used to be one of the, well, actually, it's one of the first universities in the world to require futures courses for the entire undergrad program.
Really?
Yes,
Wow.
but we kind of ended that policy 3 years ago. So now but it's still a huge futures training program in a sense that so all undergrad, if you choose to, undergraduate students can go through that process of learning about the future. And it actually started about 40 years ago, that kind of practice. Of course, 40 years ago, futures was still it's not as so-called scientific in this sense, and they didn't teach as much. But I still, until this day, I still get it from people in their 50s or 60s that came to me, who were a Tamkang graduate, and came to me that, oh, I took a futures course before. And actually, it opened my mind, and it got me curious about the future. So that I'm talking about this in a long-term sense.
Yes.
And when I see people my age talking about that, I was like, wow, that actually made a difference. And it might be a different kind of future that they were talking about, but still, you can see the seeds growing into some kind of maybe a tree in that sense.
So is Tamkang University partnering with other universities around the world to teach them how to teach the future?
Actually, we are sister university with University of Turku in Finland, and we became a sister university about maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and that the very reason that we became sister university was because of our futures program. And yes, they invited me to have a long distance course with them, and we've been having that kind of joint course throughout the year. And then we have students back and forth, and we are very good. It's a very tight program. It's a very nice one. So we actually teach the future in that sense. And I'm also working with, I'm starting to work with, I haven't started work. I'm starting to work with, I'm hoping Peter Bishop, he's doing Teach the Future in the States.
Yes.
And we've been trying to connect and then try to do more things about teaching the future and share more ideas.
Well, this is really important because we're talking about global challenges. We're talking about a very short time frame that we have. And we're talking about even the children are getting very concerned about how long we're taking. Hence the climate school strike walkout movement by high schoolers around the world. As you think around about Tamkang and yourself as a leader in the future's intelligence space, when you think about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which range from poverty to water to energy to the ocean to inequality to, I don't know, women, to which of those challenges do you feel your own personal work is most attached to?
You really ask good questions that I have to pause to think. The reason I'm pausing is because right now there's not a overlining, like, okay, this is it applies across the board, that kind of answer to me.
Yes.
To me, the most powerful one is that people walk out of these sessions or workshops feeling that, yes, I can change something. And I get, in terms of responses, honestly, usually after workshops, most women, no, I shouldn't say most women, a lot of women came to me and say, so right now I have a different view about how I see my children, or how I see the future of my children, or maybe I shouldn't ask them to do this and that anymore. That they realize that that was their own perspective about the future. They're asking their children to go into that road. But they, across every culture, I always get lots of that kind of responses from women that, okay, now I'm having a different lens about how my children's future should take hold.
It's almost like your process helps them to kind of broaden their gaze.
Yes.
You know? Awesome.
Yes.
So as we think about Women's History Month, we're drawing to a close. As I said before, I'm trying to be intentional about the stories that we're creating. And if I was to tell your story, it probably wouldn't sound like your story anymore. But as I'm hearing you, I'm hearing about Tamkang University planting these seeds of possibilities, seeds of optimism around the world in the spaces that you share this technique. And so I would like for you to share a headline story from 2030 about something you'd like to see that has come to being because of your work.
Wow, that's a good one. You're a good, Claire. Okay, headlines. futures programs are abolished because it's embedded in that kind of thinking is embedded in everyone's basic training. So we actually don't need a special futures program for any school or any institution anymore, because that's the way people think.
So basically, you have done yourself out of a job.
Yes.
You know, well, with all the AI that's being used now to do foresight, you probably just as well that you start abolish yourself.
Maybe it's faster to teach the AI how to think about the future.
You know, so one last question. Are you, based on what you're seeing about building future thinking into leadership classes in different places, are you optimistic, pessimistic, or neutralistic that this will eventually happen? Not by 2030, no. What?
I am very biased in terms of thinking that futurists are always optimistic.
Got you.
Because you have to be able to change, right? And that's why I'm doing this. That's why I'm going all over the places, because every time I go there, I feel like I feel the people and I hear their hopes and fears, and then I try to empower them, and then you see that their eyes lit up and like, yes, I can change the future. And of course, you always hear lots of pessimism about, oh, but the leadership doesn't change, the government changes so much, you can, that kind of thing. But I always say that we start from ourselves. Yeah. And then it's going to go on and on and on. And then this group of people is going to get impacted by you and that one, and it's going to spread out. That's how it's going to be. We live in the best time and the worst time. The worst time meaning that it's changing so much, and the best time meaning that it's changing so much so that people realize that the old thinking doesn't work anymore. Yeah. And now they have to embrace a new one, and futures is the one that people are starting to embrace. You see that.
Wow, thank you so much. That's a very good place to end. Futures is a way that we have to embrace in order to create the future we want. I think this is a good place to end another great conversation. Thank you, MEI MEI Song, Associate Professor of Tamkang University, Graduate Institute of the Future, and Director of the Center for Futures Intelligence and Research. We're so delighted that you could take time at 5 o'clock in the morning in Armenia to talk to me. I really, really, really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
So friends, I just want to say thank you for joining us on Future Sense Now, where we explore salient ideas for sustainable futures. We have come to the end of another great conversation, but the story continues being written by all of us. Creating the future we want is our shared responsibility. Remember, it is better for us to act as the parent of our future than the child of our past. So, as we say in Jamaica, walk good and safe journeys.
You have been listening to Future Sense Now with Dr. Claire Nelson, brought to you by the Futures Forum. For more, please visit www.thefuturesforum.org. Thank you for listening. Spread the word. Share the future.